Hi there guys, and welcome back to another video from the Really Average Wargamers. We've got a tournament report for you this time from down here on the other side of the world in New Zealand. The Kiwi gaming community is known as the Thrall Blacks, and one of their biggest events of the year is Ides of March, which as you probably guess is held in March every year in the fair city of Auckland. So packed up the trolls, which managed to fit in the overhead compartment of a plane, which is pretty good, meaning it didn't have to be checked into the hold, and got to the beautiful city of Auckland. This was a 2-day event over the course of a weekend, and you needed two 50-point lists. Didn't use Divide and Conquer, so you could use the same list over the whole weekend if you wanted to, and there were a few special snowflakes who just brought the one list to use over the course of the weekend. I brought two. My first list was an Epic Madrak list that I've been using quite a bit recently, and I think is a hell of a lot of fun to play, and I really enjoy it. It's Epic Madrak with an Impaler and a Storm Troll as his only beasts. It's got a Fell Caller and a Stone Scribe Chronicler. It's got the War Wagon. It's got a full unit of Fendblades with their unit attachment. It's got a full unit of Krill Warriors with their unit attachment, and 3 lots of their weapon attachment, the Caber Throwers. It's got a minimum unit of Krill Stone Bearers with their unit attachment, and a full unit of Burrowers. The second list is a Doomshaper 1 list, Prime Doomshaper, and it's not Runes of War, oddly. I decided to see what would happen if I decided to mash up Runes of War with the Miserable Meat Mountain. So I ended up with Prime Doomshaper, Mulg the Ancient, and an Earthborn Dire Troll, an Axa, a Pyre Troll, Janissa Stonetide, a full unit of the Krill Stone Bearers with their unit attachment, and 2 full units of Warders. So the E-Magic list is a bit of a dude spam list, if you want, and the Doomshaper list, a bit of an armor spam list. So the beginning of the first game, a little bit nervous. I knew the New Zealand scene was pretty good, and I was paired up against guy who I was later told was one of their really good players. So I was pretty nervous going into the first game. It was against Circle, and he had Kruger 2 and I think Morvana 2, but he took Kruger 2 with what I believe is probably quite a popular build for him. You can probably see from the photo there, if you're really eagle-eyed, he is a few points down. He was a real good sportsman. He forgot to deploy a unit of Shifting Stones and a Druid Wilder, and refused to put them on the table even after we realised he wanted to punish himself for the mistake. It did come back to haunt him a little bit later on. Here's the end of the game. I got a bit lucky. He decided to camp the Fury instead of casting Stormwall, allowing the War Wagon to have pretty free range of shooting. Managed to shoot Gorax, who stood just behind that proxy base that's representing Kruger. Managed to knock him down, and then with a feat from Epic Madrak, that was another shot from the War Wagon. A couple of shots from Madrak's Axe and the Burrowers was enough to chew through all of Kruger's transfers and managed to take him down. So that was pretty lucky, probably undeserved win in the first round from a guy who, very sportsmanlike, was playing 4 points down. And we go into round 2. I'll intersperse the photos of the rounds with photos of some of the models or armies that I saw on display during the day. Sometimes I got quite a lot of time in between rounds, some of the time not so much time in between rounds. I'll start off with an army that I thought was absolutely beautiful. It didn't walk away with Best Painted, but I think it was a pretty good contender. It was a Crix army. This guy was playing Body and Soul, a Denegra theme force, and that requires a lot of Cephalix judges. And that could get quite boring and quite, I think, monotonous to have on the table. But with varying different skin tones and a wonderful way of painting quite a simple red, I think that these Crix look absolutely beautiful. So going into round 2, and I find that I'm up against a Scorn player, who'd actually only brought one list for the weekend, and it was Zal and Kovas list. It was Zal, I think 3 Ancestral Guardians, Hakar the Destroyer, a unit of Immortals, a unit of Swordsmen, a couple of Beasts, and support solos, and a couple of the Extoller Soul Wards. The scenario was the new 2015 scenario, Recon, with the Central Zone and flags at either side. I decided again to go for E Madrak, seeing that he didn't have a lot of shooting. I wanted to see what would happen if a whole swarm of dudes was allowed to get up to the other side of the board. And here is a pretty grainy, pretty unfocused shot of what can happen if a whole swarm of dudes is allowed to get up to the other side of the table. What does happen is this is how the game ended. It's pretty cinematic end to the game. I'd gone up to what I thought was 4 control points. Actually, we counted later and it would have been 5, but thought I was only on 4 control points and 7 seconds left on my clock. But I had managed to take out everything except Zal on the Scorn side. That left Zal only one choice, really, which was to try and kill Madrak. So he cast the spell Last Stand on himself, charged Madrak, and used his feat, allowing him to use every killed model as boosts. So that meant he had about 5 double boosted attacks on Madrak. Managed to get Madrak down to a tough roll, which I passed. Because of the effects of Last Stand, Zal then died. So it was one of the most cinematic ends I think I've ever had to a game. Really well fought game, but luckily went 2-0 going into round 3. Here's some more photos of some of the beautiful armies that were on display during the day. The guys had obviously put a lot of work in. Most of the armies were mostly, if not fully painted, and it really paid off, really just adding that extra bit of enjoyment to the games. So going into round 3, and I find myself up against a local player who I know from my local meta playing Convergence of Cyrus. He had an Axis tier list and Father Lucant. Now, I will admit, before this game, I didn't have that much respect for Axis. I thought Father Lucant was obviously the caster of choice for Convergence and assumed that he'd be using that. So I used my Prime Doomshaper list, so I at least have some armor cracking, and both have access to Purification if it came down to it. As it was, he actually used the Axis tier list as he did, I think, for the entire weekend. And I must say, I now have a lot more respect. I have a healthy respect now for Axis. His list was Axis, the Corollary, an Inverter, a Conservator, 4 Enigma Foundries, and 5 units, 2 of which were the Clockwork Angels, and then 3 full units of the small-based infantry. The 4 Enigma Foundries meant that this list can attrition and recycle its models like nothing else. And I now have a much healthier respect for Inverters under the effect of Iron Aggression and Axis's feat. This thing managed to take out Mulg in a single activation, and from there the game just continued to slip downhill. Here's how the game ended. You can see that the Inverter, having not had its fill on Mulg, managed to get to Doomshaper, and it was game over from there. So a very well fought game, and lesson learned, I now have a much healthier respect for Axis than I did before. So going into round 4, the last game of the first day, I was 2 wins and 1 loss, and found myself on the other side of the table from this lovely gentleman. I was pretty new to the meta and didn't know a lot of people, but guys, if you're ever around New Zealand and you want a fun, friendly game, this is the guy you should call on. His name is Scott Avery, and I genuinely hope that he doesn't mind me putting up this photograph of him. He is really a special snowflake. He's one of those guys who genuinely knows that the game is there for fun, and we could not have had a more fun game if we'd tried. He was playing Mercenaries. He had 2 lists, a Dude Spam list led by Fiona the Black, and Broadside's Bart bringing all the Warjacks. I thought that I'd bring Epic Madrak, really enjoying a whole swarm of medium-based trolls running across the battlefield. And he brought Broadside's Bart and his Warjacks. He had a Galleon, I think 3 Vanguards, a whole host of support solos, including Epic Eris, Iana and Holt, Gorman, and Dougal McNeil, and 2 units of Chaos the Eliminators. The scenario was incoming with the 2 zones and objectives. And this game went on for quite a long time, actually. Under the effect of batten down the hatches, I really couldn't damage the Galleon, and it was even having a hard time on the light jacks at armor 23. thanks to their shields, and batten down the hatches. I thought that I might be able to clear and take the right-hand zone, but as it turns out, Kazi Eliminators have a stupidly high defence, and try as I might, I just couldn't clear those until I was forced in the end game to send Madrak into the zone to clear out a solo a turn and claw some control points there. This game actually went to 6-5 on control points. I just managed to eke out. We both went to 5 at the same time, but in my next turn I just about managed to control his zone. And you can see Madrak there on his lonesome, having cleared out the zone, to score a 6th control point and go 6-5 for a very lucky win in a very close fought but hilarious game. So that was the end of day 1. I was lucky enough to be at 3 wins and 1 loss. And time for some R&R, some pizza, some beers, and getting ready for day 2. So dragging myself out of bed on day 2, ready and raring to go, I got to the hall to find that I was again playing a local that I know from Christchurch on the South Island. I was playing another Circle player, and he also had Kruger 2 and Bradigus. Now, I was really hoping that he'd drop Bradigus, because I had my P Doom Shaper list, which has done quite well against it in a practice game. I should have realised that he, of course, wouldn't take Bradigus, because he knew that I had P Doom Shaper, and it had done very well against it in a practice game. So he took Kruger 2. It was exactly the same list that I'd played against in the first game, except this player shrewdly remembered the second unit of Shifting Stones and the Druid Wilder. I can't really explain why, but I decided to drop my P Doom Shaper list, hoping that he'd choose Bradigus, and very quickly realised the error of my ways. The scenario was 2 fronts. It's a very live, very scoreable scenario with the 2 zones and objectives. It's possible to score 3 points on 1 turn and 2 points thereafter. And I realised just how bad an idea it is to take slow, low defence, low model count armies against Kruger 2. With the combination of his feat and telekinesis, he was able to win on his turn 3, I believe, having only had to kill 1 single model. The rest were thrown out of the zone by Kruger himself or by the Druids. So it really didn't take him that much to win on scenario pretty easily, and a lesson there very hard learned. It occurred to me actually far too late after the game that P Doom Shaper, of course, has Banishing Ward as a spell, which would have been perfect to avoid the use of telekinesis and, of course, the Druid's attacks to push all my models out of the zone. So, a little tip there, Banishing Ward on a unit of Warders, Banishing Warders, and you've got a much better matchup in this case. So going into round 6, I think, the 6th game of the weekend, I found myself up against a Khador player playing Fire Support. It's the scenario with 2 flags and 2 objectives. He had Butcher 3, who I really don't like to see, with Silence of Death, and Sorcerer 2, who I think can really deal with armour pretty well with her feet. I didn't think I could use Doom Shaper in case he used Sorcerer 2. She would just, I think, chew through Warders and mulg even the Earthborn with her feet. So I was really forced to use Madrak, I think. And he, of course, dropped Butcher 3. With Grievous Wounds, he's a great drop against Trolls. I thought I might have a chance with a bit of a shooting game. Didn't really pan out that way. I think the game panned out better than I was expecting it to go. Butcher 3 is pretty terrifying if you're relying on tough to get you through things. I was forced into a long shot assassination against a fully camping Butcher, and I think I did quite well to get him down to 8 boxes, but a 2/3 dead Butcher isn't a dead Butcher. And the next turn he managed to quite easily get to Madrak with a combination of all his shenanigans. And Flashing Blade, Flashing Blade, Flashing Blade later, Madrak was dead. So that's 3 wins and 3 losses, and we're going into the final game of the weekend. So going into round 7, the 7th and final game of the weekend, and I was up against a fantastic Legion of Everbite player. He's got his own blog, and I'll put a link up on the page now. And he was running Epic Lilith and Epic Absolonia. And I tell you, if I was a Legion player, I would run Epic Absolonia all day, every day. She is phenomenal, and she really turns Legion beasts up to 11 if they weren't there already. His list was Absolonia herself, a Shredder that I believe had been doing phenomenal work all weekend, a Carnivian, a Scythian, a Ravagore, a Naga Night Lurker, and one of the flying beasts, I believe it's a Seraph, but don't quote me on that. He also had a few support solos, including a couple of Shepherds and a Forsaken. The scenario was Incursion, and I know that Legion don't really like seeing Runes of War, so I thought I'd take my Runes of War / Miserable Meat Mountain mashup thing by using Doomshaper and all the Warders. I knew there was pretty much no question of him getting the Alpha Strike, and thought if I could time it right with the use of Doomshaper's feet, I could really punish these Legion beasts for coming in and spending any fury trying to take my guys down. That's pretty much what happened on his turn 2. He used Absolonia's feet, managed to get Conferred Rage off for all the benefits of, +2 speed, +2 mat, +2 strength, reach and flight on all of his beasts. So they came charging in. Luckily, I'd managed to get Doomshaper's feet up, so they started taking pretty bad damage every time they were doing anything. I still managed to lose about a third of my warders, and Mulg was pretty heavily damaged. I was lucky that he was only by less than 2 inches shy of actually getting to Doomshaper himself with a charging Scythian. If he'd managed to slipstream, then we decided afterwards he would be able to get in on Doomshaper, but luckily he wasn't. So he was flailing against a wall of high armour. Managed to do quite a bit of damage, but at a cost of quite a bit of health to the Legion beasts. The counter-strike by the Warders and a rather angry Mulg managed to take down, I think, at least half, if not 2/3 of the Legion beasts. And from there I started scoring on the scenario. Here's how the game ended, with an Earthborn charging up to Absolonia. Unfortunately, charging out of control range, so I didn't manage to force him. But by that point, I was able to win on control points. It was a really well-fought game against a phenomenal opponent, who I hope to see more of in the future. And managed to end the game going 4 wins and 3 losses over the course of the weekend. So that was the end of the weekend. I went 4 wins and 3 losses, and it was time for the awards to be handed out. Best Painted Army, quite rightly, I think, went to this phenomenal army that included this beautiful galleon fighting some sort of sea beastie. Best Sport went, again, quite rightly, to this guy again. And personally, I managed to come 20th out of about 50 guys. So top half was what I was aiming for. That was pretty good. And luckily, just about scraped through with Best in Faction for my Trollbloods, which was really nice to see. The prize for that being this wonderful beer mug, which I'm sure I will be able to use in future. So that was the end of the weekend. I'd like to thank the guys who organised it, and if you're ever around the New Zealand area in March and you're looking for a tournament to go to, I would heavily recommend you guys go to Ides of March. Well, thanks for watching, guys. That was a bit of a ramble through my latest tournament weekend. And please join us soon for the next video or battle report from the Really Average Wargamers.